now we're going to have an extra video. I mean, I'll usually do 3 now, but I'm going to do 4 this week. But it's a one-off. Only because I just watched these or rewatched them. I thought it'd be good to do a video on them, and especially compare and contrast. Because these are 2 excellent films. There's The Prestige, which is my favourite Christopher Nolan film, and Arrival, which is my favourite Denis Villenueve film. Now, both these directors have had ups and downs in their career. Both of them have like massive amount of fans and some detractors. They're both kind of at the top of the Hollywood kind of art house director type of thing. Like the directors who make blockbusters, but the kind of art house fans also quite like them. Although Nolan gets a bit of a trashing recently, you know, like his stock has been going downhill in the art house circuit for a bit, but Villeneuve still hasn't got that yet. But I think in both cases, they're very, very talented directors. You may not like them or you don't, but there's good craftsmanship involved in the films. You know, they're stronger in different areas than each other, but for me, these are the 2 strongest films. These are the ones I like most. Now, The Prestige is a film I've really liked for years. I mean, it's based on an idea that would have been difficult for Nolan to mess up for me, because you've got like dueling magicians set in a previous century. You know, you've got kind of science exploding onto the scene. You've got like crazy motivations, like bizarre psychologies. You've got like just everything I'm looking for. You've also, well, I just knocked over my light. That was good of me, wasn't it? Anyway, meanwhile, the Arrival is about aliens arriving, hence the title. And it's about language and how language affects the way you think, and how of an alien culture arriving, how it affects humanity. But the thing with both these films, they both feel personal to the directors. They both feel like neither of them are the biggest budget, biggest extravaganza films. They're both made before or after big films that they made that were famous for. Like The Prestige came between the first 2 Batman films that Nolan did, and Arrival came after Sicario and before Blade Runner 2046. So they were films that were kind of like, they were well received, but they weren't the ones that were getting hyped up. You know, and if you look at the filmography, these 2 tend to fall down to the bottom end of their filmographies for lots of people. Like, it's not really the one that gets hyped up. Now, I would definitely say Arrival is far superior to Dune, which is the recent Villeneuve film, you know, which I was not keen on. And Prestige is far superior to the Batman films, for me. You know, I just think it's a much stronger, more interesting film. So I'll start with The Prestige. The Prestige takes... Actually, both of these films have a narrative structure which messes with time. Now, Nolan does that a lot, but this is where he does it probably to the most emotional effect. The thing about both these films, both of them have what you call twists, but the twists are more like vertical twists, where it's like, there is a twist, but it's not really about the twist. It's about what the twist means to people involved. It's like what things they don't know about, actually, how that affects their actions. And that's the importance of the twist. Now, I'll get to spoilers, but I won't get to spoilers quite right now yet. So, Prestige is about 2 magicians. During the early part of the film, the wife of Hugh Jackman's character dies after her hands have been tied by the Christian Bale character for a trick. She can't get out of the knot. She dies. Jackman blames Bale. And hence they start a rivalry where they're trying to one-up each other and also trying to mess about each other's act, so that if one of them's getting ahead, the other one will go and mess their act up, so they fall flat in the face. It's pure revenge, pure petty revenge. They can't just leave each other alone. They have to destroy each other. Starts out with Jackman, and then he goes for revenge, and then Bale is like, I'm not going to take this. So it's about the sense of vengeance, and sense of how vengeance can get out of control and can destroy everyone's lives. But it's also what vengeance is to a person. Like, why do they go for vengeance? And what's in their character that makes this more satisfying than moving on with their life. That's what the kind of story is. It's also a story of tales within tales. People reacting and then finding out that they've been played. People react in a way that if they'd known more, they might not have reacted. So these two characters bring the worst in each other. But you also get lots of stuff like David Bowie's Tesla and him being hunted down by Edison because he was a rival. And it's all about that element. And the whole idea of the three levels of a magic trick is also based on a coin. And the idea was, what drives people to actually want to create magic tricks? I mean, the audience wants the delight of the magic trick, but it's also how does the magic trick play into other professions like science, and because Tesla's running his own sort of version of a magic trick throughout the film as well, and various people are doing it, and it's like, but it's also, what does it mean to why are these people addicted to creating this, magic trick? What's missing in their lives that creates a need? That's what the film's about. And that's why the film really works. Ultimately, it's about the drives that create and destroy these lives. Which is much more character-based than some of Nolan's other films, but it's also within a narrative structure that is a thriller. You try to find out what's going on, but once you find out what's actually going on, when you do the rewatch, it's much more tragic as you see the fall from grace of these characters. So that's how it works better than some of his other films, in the sense that once you know what's going on, once you know the twist, it's actually there's a lot more depth to it. Because the first time out it's the flashy thriller, and the second time out it's the tragedy. Which I'll get to in the spoiler section. Arrival is about these aliens that appear. Arrival aliens is very similar to what happened on Red of Rama, the Arthur C. Clarke story. When that one is in space, they have to go into space and do it. But here the aliens come to Earth. And basically the aliens are not communicating to start with. No one's understanding what they're about. And they have to try and investigate what they're about, try and work out the scientific elements of the film, of the aliens in the film. And this is where it becomes its own thing, where you go into the ship and you see this impressive ship that's very mysterious, and it's from technology you can't quite figure out. That's why I referenced Venom's Rama, because that's the whole story, is travelling through this ship and trying to work out what it's all about. And this one, you get to that point and you start talking to the aliens, but talking to the aliens is impossible because you've got a different language. And Amy Adams' character comes in and she's the person who has to develop the language to interpret what the aliens are doing and also communicate with them. So before they can find out what they're about, they have to work out how to even communicate with them, how to understand them. So before they can ask the questions the military wants to know, and before they can confirm what the scientists want to know, who's led by Jeremy Renner's character, who's with our lead character throughout, they're trying to work out how to communicate with them and find out what they want. And that's the narrative story. But also within this narrative, you've got these flashbacks to Amy Adams' character's life, or maybe it's not. And then there's other narrative elements that come through. But it's about the actual search for meaning within these circumstances. Because some people, the meaning is we're under attack. For some people, the meaning is we have to work it out more. We have to really put the work in to figure this out. Because a lot of alien arrival things, a lot of time it's about what it says about us more than what it says about the aliens. That's what this film is, but it's much more subtle, really, and how it does it so that it's not about it in subtle ways. Because a normal film, they would actually do it in big, massive speeches. And this one is very quiet moments. They get the point across, but it's all about the ambiguity of some people will understand it, some people won't. And it's like our natures are warlike and troublesome, and we cause problems. But everything's in a very subtle way because everybody involved is trying their best to be intelligent until they're not. And you see the weaknesses evolve. This one works a lot better than Dune for me, is because Villeneuve always brings the character actors down to be quieter. And in this story it works a lot more, so if you add a lot of depth to their paying attention and detail to detail. I think in Dune I found it just sucked the life out of the story at times. So that's the general thing with the film. Both films are terrific. Both films are kind of mysteries, but they're really about character. So the mystery of the arrival and what the aliens want is down to character, ultimately. It's a very emotional thing really, but it's about character. And that's why it's wonderful. Okay, the spoilers, as in The Prestige, the issue ultimately is trying to figure out how the other person does a trick. And we find out you're basically finding the two different views of magic and what it means to people, really. In The Prestige, you have two characters, one played by Christian Bale, one played by Hugh Jackman. The Hugh Jackman character was the one that's first wronged by the egotism of Christian Bale's character. But as you go on, you find out, by the end, that Christian Bale's playing twins. Those two characters, they switch places after each performance. And their trick is the transported man. Getting from one location to the other, there's a massive gap that people walk beside and wonder what it's about. It's because they're twins. And the trick is, no one knows they're twins. No one knows the other twin exists. Not even their wives. And that's the sacrifice. That's the trick. Why would you do that to yourself? Well, because they're both focused on magic. There's something about that feeling that they're addicted to. And that addiction destroys their lives. It ends up making they both fall in love with different women. Like one Christian Bale character falls in love with Rebecca Hall's character, who's a very normal person. Another one falls in love with a character played by Scarlett Johansson, who's a showwoman. And both these women have create different needs, have different things. They create the different needs of the individual Christian Bale characters. And because they cannot just tell these two what the trick is, it destroys their lives and makes Rebecca Hall's character commit suicide, and Scarlett Johansson's character leave him because she thinks he's cruel. And she sees schizophrenia each time. So the first thing you're watching it, you're thinking, this guy's really schizo. The second thing you're watching it, you know what the trick is, and it's tragic. It's just tragic that this guy cannot get out of his own way and just tell a few people that, well, this is what we're doing. You know. Which was simple. But he can't trust anybody. So he's the closest it is with his own brother. So two people become one, basically. And it's a wonderful, weird idea of psychology of what it means to someone to do the trick. And it's obviously played up against something that's wrong with their character. Something that's deep-seated. They need that sense of achievement. They're the more human character. I mean, it's tragic, it's awful. They do horrible mistakes. They start off the rivalry by having the more extroverted character start it all off by being arrogant. So they start it all off, but ultimately they're more human because the kind of brother has humanity to understand what he's done, the mistakes he's made. They both understand the mistakes they've made. They are human. They are very flawed. And they understand the need they have, and ultimately they have to face life without the tricks at the end. The Hugh Jackman character is so much worse. He starts out going for revenge for his dead wife, but he goes much further than that. He goes well beyond the dead wife at a certain point. He just wants to destroy this guy. And he'll do anything he can to destroy him. He'll shoot his fingers off, which leads to a horrible thing where, because one brother's lost fingers, the other brother has to lose their fingers too. He's just insane. and he's egotistical and he wants to know how the magic trick works, even though everyone's saying it's a double. And he even copies it for a time with a double until Christian Bale gets revenge on him and makes double be insane. But he wants the magic to be real. He wants the trick to be real. And basically, the Christian Bale character understands it's just a trick. It's not real. He's into it for the craftsmanship in a weird way. And because he's such a craftsman, he kind of blinds himself to what's going on around him and doesn't understand how to deal with that. So it's not malicious, it's not utter malice, it's someone that traps themselves they can't get off. The Jackman character is much worse. He knows what he's doing. He sends people to spy on them and everything else, and he is utterly malicious, and it's ultimately not to... He wants the magic to be real for some reason. He's got this weird desire for the magic to be real no matter what it causes, what the problem it causes. He wants it to be real, and it's like a real immaturity in the soul. Like, this is a guy you find that ultimately was a lord, and he came down to struggle with everyone else, become this magician. And it's immaturity in his part. He's all the money in the world. He wants the magic to be real. And he turns into a total villain, and he totally throws away all his humanity, all his, ideas that he's a dignified man. He tries to bury people alive and everything. He is the worst. And it gives Jackman a chance to actually play the worst. Because normally he plays in likeable characters. He actually gets a chance to play a full-on villain. And he really relishes it. It's one of his best performances. And the emotionality of these two... This guy who can't quite get over the fact that tricks are just tricks. So there's the reality he wants revenge, but also the reality is he can't face the idea that tricks are just tricks. He's not mature enough to understand that. He can do all the magic tricks he wants, but he wants the sensation of being awed by everybody. He wants magic to be real. He's that immature. And he's that sociopathic to others, ultimately. Although he starts off being fairly decent, but his obsession drives him more and more, and he becomes something that's pretty ugly by the end of it, and pretty nasty. So it's a tragedy of both characters. They both bring out the worst in each other and become the worst versions of each other. But it's a wonderful film. It's beautifully done. The intercutting's terrific throughout because they're always giving you information quietly. Sometimes you see something, you don't understand it. And there's certain things you see in the background that become more important later on. And they also hide Christian Bale as the other Christian Bale pretty well by actually putting stuff in his mouth to make his face feel wider. And there's a fake beard obviously, but also the fill of the face as well to make it feel like a different person. So there's lots of things that are going on. And they make this it's all about illusions, also the desire of illusions and the limitations of illusions. So it's a really terrific film. It's definitely, I think, the most layered of the Christopher Nolan films. One of his most layered films. Because I think there's a lot less action and there's a lot less temptation to go towards action, which I think sometimes mars the more fun parts of his films because it has to become blockbusters. And this one doesn't have to be a blockbuster, and it's more about the story and it actually works better that way. So I wish he'd do more films like Prestige because I think that's where his talent really lies. Something like that or Memento. I think something which I likely Tenet is it gets undone by its scale. It would have worked better as a smaller film. Because you still get those instincts of tragedy and film noir in these later films, but there's a lot of action as well, and I think that's what the action takes away from the story. Arrival is also not many effects. It's a quiet film. And also, the spoiler element of this one is that Amy Adams' character is having memories that actually are of the future. Because the alien language, these aliens they see the future and the past as one, a totality. Future and the past are happening together almost for them. They're doing things in the present that's for the future, and they see it all as one. The language is curved rather than straight ahead, so there's a sense of going round and round. You're in a kind of loop almost. And as Amy Adams watches the language, she starts to see images of her future, because within the language, within the way of thinking, it becomes circular rather than straightforward. So even though you could argue, okay, that's a bit dodgy science, it's good enough for the story to make the story work. It's a good way to do time travel without time travel. And it's a good enough way to set up the parameters of this story and makes it very satisfying, because it's sort of like the first Terminator film, where it's satisfying because the time loop stuff works really well, but there's an emotion base to it. Even the second Terminator film does that same thing of there's time loops, but there's emotionality to it. This one does that same thing. It's a bit of mother and child. It's a mother and her doomed love story that you don't understand the love story till almost the end, because it's between her and Jeremy Renner, and for most of the time they're just people working this problem. The love story stuff happens after the film, and between the film and between the present day of the film and the future flashbacks. And it's very quiet. That's why Villeneuve is really good at that kind of stuff, where he brings the tone down and doesn't do all these romantic things. It's a lot of stuff you find out about Renner comes quietly towards the end, because like Amy Adams, he's a very quiet figure who's very isolated. He's a scientist. She's a scientist. They don't project much. They project their work, but they actually keep themselves to themselves. They're very isolated characters. So a small amount of detail about each other is way more important than a massive confession scene. And because the scale of the drama is pulled down so much, those things have impact. So that's why it has impact. It's all about the small details. It's also about the pace and the cutting of these flashbacks slowly emerging throughout, and it's how she experiences them. And because at the beginning you think, for the first half of the film, it's very dark and rainy, and you think she's suffering depression for she's lost her child. You think that these are flashbacks. And then as you go forward, you realise they're not flashbacks, they're flash forwards, as you work out what's going on. But their emotions are very tied into the life of the character, and the way that they're done are just enough to see there's she's a quiet person in the story, very determined to get away. He gives the added emotionality for the character. And then when he ties the Renner's character, you see there's more to him as well, through how she remembers what's happened. So you get a lot of stuff from the way these things are paced, these images are paced. So it's a perfect way to do flashback, flash forwards, and images that aren't tied to the main narrative, but they become the main narrative. Ultimately, it's a story between her and her daughter who will die, and she has to live with the knowledge that her daughter will die, even before she gives birth to her, because that's the way this new narrative type thing works. So it's almost like an alien not just showing humanity there's other life out there, it's also showing humanity there's another way of thinking out there. And it's humanity trying to work out another way of thinking because they're stuck in their own way, and it's teaching them in a way without being really patronised and being a lot of science fiction they want to be. So that's why it becomes a really wonderful film. I think one of the things I'm explaining these films, but one of the few things about both the films is they're very emotional films. They have a kind of reserved front, but there is emotion behind everything throughout it. I mean, in The Prestige, the Christian Bale character loves his daughter. Both versions of him love their daughter. That's their emotional tie. Ultimately, that's the kind of tie in the second half of the story for them to actually fight for her, rather than their own vendetta, which makes them much more human ultimately than the Hugh Jackman character. And that drives the second half of the film. And this one, it's a mother and daughter story. When Prestige is a father and daughter story. But it's still something about what else happens and what tragedies happen. That's the kind of emotional core, which keeps the films being emotional, even though they have other elements that could make you more pulled back emotionally. So they're both beautiful films, both really well done. They're kind of examples of how to do a mainstream, intelligent movie, as most of these mainstream films are usually terrible. But these are the two examples of how to do it properly. And it's not saying the directors always got it right, they haven't. but these examples, they got it right. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it made sense of these, because they're such bizarre narratives, it's hard to explain them. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back with one final video, and that'll be me for the week. Right, bye for now.